Welcome to the official Warrior podcast from Max. I'm Lisa Ling, a journalist and Warrior superfan.
And I'm Hoon Hee, fan of alliteration and the actor who plays friend to everyone, Chow. And I'm also a writer on the series.
And Hoon Hee, as your host, we'll be breaking down every episode of Warrior Season 3, and we'll learn more about how this incredible new season came together through interviews with the creators, cast, and crew. We'll also be discussing the very real historical events and people that inspired the characters and story of Warrior, including Bruce Lee, whose writings inspired the entire series.
Today, we're diving into Episode 7, getting close to the end. Episode 7 is entitled, Gotta Be Crooked to Get Along in a Crooked World. I feel like you have to say it that way. And it's written by Glenise Mullins. We'll be joined today by Kieran Bew, who plays Sergeant Bill O'Hara in the series, as well as UC Irvine history professor Yong Chan. We're going to get into the history of the tensions between the Irish and the Chinese in the late 1800s. So, Lisa.
So, Hoon Hee.
I'm really excited to talk with Kieran. He's one of my closest friends in the cast, one of the first people I worked with, and he does just such a phenomenal job playing Irishman Bill O'Hara in Warrior. Kieran's character Bill overlaps my character Chow in that we are both sort of participants in different worlds, but we're sort of forced to work together in order to accomplish our mutual goals. And we also interact with a lot of different characters because Bill is one of the people that spends a good amount of his time in Chinatown making deals, sometimes accepting bribes, but also dealing with the denizens of Chinatown. Our characters tend to put on different faces depending on the situation and who we're talking to. And those scenes are always extremely fun to play, particularly with Kieran.
Well, and Big Bill and Chow have their own kind of special relationship, don't they? I mean,
I don't know what you're implying.
Isn't it in the first season that Bill buys weapons from Chow for his police force, which has been assigned to Chinatown?
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic, and Kieran and I can literally talk forever about this. It really gives new meaning to the words navel gazing when we get together over a couple of drinks. But he spends as much time and effort researching as anyone I've ever encountered, and he goes deep into the history of the era, of his character, of the dialects. He takes a really holistic approach to it, and I think it's all reflected in his work. It's going to be really fun to talk to him about Bill. But first, we have to recap.
That's right. This is your spoiler warning. So if you haven't watched episode 7, stop listening to us and go watch it right now. We'll be here when you're ready.
We have lots to do, so do not keep us waiting. We are waiting for you to watch this episode. Watch now. Episode 7 Recap. In Chinatown, the Donahue brothers break into a closed market to steal food. Harrison and Graham of the Chinatown squad take the Irishman in. Bill begins his new job doing manual labor at his brother-in-law's company. Lee, Abigail, and Chow kill Happy Jack for his betrayal in episode 6. Chow issues the fatal shot. Yeah, he does. Yeonmi reveals to Assam that she's taking her future into her own hands by stealing from the Hopway.
You've been stealing from us.
I'm just printing a few extras. No one's gonna know.
If Youngchun finds out...
He's not.
I won't be able to protect you.
He won't unless you tell him. This money buys me a future. Or at least a chance at one. I can get on a train. I can go somewhere far. I can start over.
You have to promise me not to take any more.
Ling mediates between Atoy and the pimp who attacked her since his brothel is on Longxi territory. Atoy offers Ling an insight. Your new place is very Chinese, very traditional, like the version of us the ducks expect.
It was a strategy. A way to lure them in. But perhaps that was a mistake.
The only mistake was assuming that appealing to them would change how they treat us. We belong here, Ling. Even if the ducks don't know it yet.
Leary enters the Banshee, and it is pure chaos. An Irishman was attacked in retaliation for the robbery in Chinatown, and it spun the half-drunk crowd into a frenzy. The men want to hit back at the Chinese, but Leary warns them, storming into Chinatown would start another riot. Leary then confronts Assam and the Hopway in Chinatown.
You're a man. Cross the line.
Kind of like you're doing right now.
I'm just delivering a message. Keep the Chinese out of our fucking neighborhood.
I got some bad news for you. I don't control Chinatown.
There's a 10-foot fucking portrait on a wall says otherwise. I'll keep my boys in if you keep yours out. Maybe between the two of us, we keep a bunch of people from ending up dead.
Father Jun paces back and forth outside the Longzi headquarters, demanding a fight with Longzi. Leon comes out to see Father Jun, trembling in the cold. He notices something is not right, and he returns Father Jun to the Hopway headquarters. Youngjun tells Hong that he blames Assam for his father's decline, and that Ling has told him that Assam is in a relationship with the printer. He has doubts that Assam is still putting the Tong first.
If we can get rich without dicing each other, maybe this partnership isn't so bad.
Sometimes I forget just how fresh you are, man. Peace never lasts. And when this deal with Ling blows up, I'm gonna need soldiers who are loyal to me. And when it comes to Assam,
He'd dice or die for you, boss.
I'm not sure about that.
Wow, Hoon, things are really coming to a head in Chinatown, aren't they?
It's about time, too. Episode 7. This thing's been simmering for a while. I love how Assam and Leary are both trying to hold back their respective groups. The impact of the riot from the end of season 2 is still clearly felt. It's something that no one wants to revisit, and it remains a traumatic experience for the entire city. It's a pressure cooker neither of them want to be in.
That's right. And meanwhile, Father Jun is declining, and Youngjun is really starting to blame Assam for it. Their relationship isn't looking very good right now, is it?
No, and that instability is going to make the peace between the Chinese and the Irish more difficult, any sort of alliance between the Longzi and the Hopway more difficult, and even the internal equanimity of Youngjun more difficult.
Well, this is the perfect moment for us to check in with our historian in residence, Professor Yong Chen. Yong Chen is a professor of history and Asian American studies at UC Irvine and is an expert on Chinese American history, especially in San Francisco during the time period that Warrior is set in. He's the author of Chinese San Francisco, 1850 to 1943, A Trans-Pacific Community, and Chop Suey USA, The Rise of Chinese Food in America. Now, we've heard from Professor Chen before about the history of San Francisco's Chinatown and the Tongs, but today, as we've heard about the tensions heating up in this episode between the Irish and the Chinese in Chinatown, we're going to get some background on some of the forces beneath those tensions.
In the 1870s, by that time, a very strong anti-Chinese movement had already emerged. A very, very important force in the anti-Chinese movement consisted of Irish immigrants. So the Irish story is a very interesting one. Many of them, they came to the U.S. in large numbers after the potato famine in the mid-19th century. So for most of them, they arrived in the U.S. Almost at the same time as the Chinese, right? So they arrived on the East Coast. Over there, because they are Catholics and, they spoke a different language, comes from different cultural background, and they were very, very poor too. And on the East Coast, because of factors concerning race, social class, religion, they faced a lot of discrimination. Legally, they are classified as white. So under the first Naturalization Act of the nation, passed in 1790, and only white persons could become naturalized U.S. citizens, right? So the Irish could become naturalized citizens, right? But socially, economically, and even politically, they faced a lot of discrimination. Anglo-Americans did not regard them as white enough, as truly white people. Sometimes they saw them as a different, inferior race. So what they did, many of them did, was to move on to the West, all the way to California. And in the West, what they could do is to whiten their ethnicity. And one of the tools that they did was through the expression of anti-Chinese racism. And for those Irish, not all of them for sure, but many of them who stayed on the East Coast, they did so by expressing anti-Black, anti-African American racism. So in this process, they become white. They declare their whiteness.
What's so interesting to me about what Professor Chen said is that it speaks to this idea that the Irish moving west was an attempt to whiten their ethnicity. They gain influence, they gain property, they gain power, all of these things that become the hallmarks of status and thus also the hallmarks of what we accept as quote-unquote whiteness. And it's no accident that their political value is a part of that as well in our particular story. And since we're talking about the Irish, it's time to talk to our friend and actor and lovely boy, Kieran Bew, who in Warrior plays the extremely Irish, casually racist mess of a man with a very well-intentioned heart, maybe, and one of my favorite characters, Sergeant Bill O'Hara.
Kieran Bew is an actor and producer born in Hartlepool, England in the UK. He spent time in his childhood as a competitive swimmer, basketball player, and title-winning competitive fencer. He currently competes domestically for Haverstock Fencing Club, and we're so happy to welcome him to the podcast. Kieran, you're coming to us actually from your home, I believe, where you said you have a massive family, much like Officer Bill in Warrior.
Yes, I'm hiding in the darkest corner of my house, which is the only corner there isn't a baby or a small child.
How many kids do you have?
I only have 3, but they're quite loud. And Bill has 5, I think. But my kids are wonderful and theatrical and just active. So they don't like to go to bed. So we were trying to work out if I could come on the podcast. And of course, because of the time difference, every option was just right at bedtime. And even if they went later, I said, no, the kids are still awake. I'm sorry. They don't go to bed till about midnight. I'm sorry.
They're gonna be actors.
Well, we're delighted that you were able to find some time to tuck away. Kieran, I wanted to ask you first, what is it like to have been given this role that was conceived by Bruce Lee himself?
It's kind of mind-blowing, really. There was notes we were given when we joined the cast from Shannon, from the treatment that Bruce Lee had written. And the character was described as being a sidekick of Assam's. And he has a drink problem, and he's just sort of, journey around together. And that was the starting point, I guess, for the guys to write the character. I took that really seriously, because there is something very special about Bruce. There's a mysticism and a sort of legend of him, which we've grown up with. And to think that he'd even considered it felt like a big deal. I did a lot of work on the character because of that, I think. I think I did a lot of extra contemplation.
Kieran's a big contemplator. That's one thing you'll learn if you work with him. There's a lot of contemplation.
There's a lot of talking as well. I did Hoon too, by the way. He's one of the worst.
I feel very much like we're wingmen to each other.
It's interesting about clearing your mind and not having a thought and trying to be present in the moment as an actor. Because sometimes the hardest thing is to shut off your brain and your mind. But in order to do that, you often have to go around all the houses and explore things. And often that's the best part of the job anyway, is the exploration of the character. So I took it really seriously. It just felt like it elevated everything, and it probably bonded everybody as well within their characters. That this show had been created by him. But I did feel a lot of excitement that he started the character.
Kieran was one of the cast members that I worked with earliest. So we discovered a lot of, compatible qualities in terms of how we worked, which was great. But also, I remember noticing in a conversation with Kieran first, how significant Bruce Lee was to the non-Asian side of the cast, that this was something that everybody was responding to. And it was a kind of a great illustration of the reach of this icon.
I was going to ask you, did Bruce Lee mean something to you before this project came about?
Yeah, so I come from a little town in the northeast of England that primarily sort of produces football players, boxers and rugby players, I think. I didn't do those sports. I was a swimmer and a basketball player, and I fenced. I was a fencer. So when I was about 9, I started fencing at my local club. And of course, I really did just want to be in Musketeers movies and sword fight on camera, I realized. And at that club, when they were teaching us basics, they talked about Bruce Lee, like right away. And they talked about his love of fencing and how he studied fencing and how he used elements of fencing to develop his own style, and primarily the stop hit, so which is attacking into someone's preparation, because it's the most efficient way to take somebody out. So that was my first kind of, we were kids. And then, we lived in a little village just out of the town, and there was a guy that used to come around with videos in the back of his car, and the kids in the street would all pour out and we'd all rent them for 50p a week. And he just had the most incredible martial arts section. So we watched, all of the B movies, and we continually rented the same one. So like Enter the Dragon was probably my favorite. It was just, I mean, you're saying about the non-Asian cast members, but like, I never thought of it like that. I mean, to me, Enter the Dragon is like a James Bond movie,
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And the characters are so bold, and to think of all the other movies that it's influenced. So like I said, we were watching, I call them B movies. That sounds pejorative. Of course it's not. I mean things like Bloodsport or the entire Jean-Claude Van Damme era. And every single movie you watch, every single one, there is homage to his films. There is homage to his choreography. And we just poured over it. I mean, the influence was enormous.
Well, Kieran, in what way was playing this character, Officer Bill, different from other characters that you've played, and just being part of this kind of a show that was grounded in this particular time in American history?
Well, the part's different because, for a start, when you're given a role in an ensemble drama like this, the camera and the story can only shine a light on a certain number of parts at a time. And the gift of playing Bill is that I get to talk to everybody. Not only did I have 5 kids in the show, I got to interact with politicians above me and subordinates at work, and then people within the world where I'd created other aspects and other facets of the person who he is. He's a different person depending on which area of the city he is, whether he's with his wife at home or he's in a casino at 3 o'clock in the morning, whether he's there in his official capacity or he's there to celebrate one of his vices. And so Bill he's constantly chasing the last lie that he's told, and he's constantly trying to put a front on whatever he's actually feeling. So as an actor, that is a massive gift, especially in a show with so many characters. So I've never taken anything for granted with this show. And, I think Bill comes from a place that is well-meaning, and he literally comes from a place, I think, based around family and structure and maybe even religious morality. Like I wouldn't say he's a religious person, but he comes from a culture that espouses to be good. But I think, like all the best characters, he has areas where he's a hypocrite and he's trying for something, but he might behave differently behind it. And the show, obviously, because I'm appointed to the Chinatown squad in the first episode, it's not what he wants, isn't the job he wants, but it does afford him opportunities to explore vices and hide things as well. But it's a powder keg for him. It's like the perfect place and it's the worst place. It's Olivia and I were discussing this in season 1 about she bribes me. Now, people like Artoy or Chow, who are people who are keeping a certain equilibrium in Chinatown, they trade on information and being ahead of the game.
We joke in the production that like Bill loves to be miserable. Like there's a state that he's in, and so he's constantly caught between things and forced into that like wedged position, which I know Kieran as an actor just adores. That's like it's such a great place to play. I think that's one of the ways that people really identify with the world itself. This sort of he's the person that works in that liminal zone, much like Chow actually, but like. He's constantly touching upon these two things that are pulling him in different directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is a gift as an actor, because you're never necessarily saying what you mean and meaning what you say, because you're playing the person or the situation to either get away, get out, or just manipulate it to your own ends. We discussed a lot about the language in the show. I use racial slurs liberally, I'd say, through the show.
That's an understatement.
It is an understatement. And you know, I think I looked at that as it was very important to use it in a pedestrian manner and not just in anger and not just spat out, because I think Bill doesn't know that he's racist. He's not being, I don't think he understands that. I think he's describing the world. And I think that, for instance, I have this scene where I realize Assam can speak English, and it's only then that Bill really connects with him and treats him like a human being. It's kind of, it's abhorrent, really.
That's one of my favorite things about the character and about the way you play him, because we do have characters that are so, you know, the way that they're portrayed as racists is so dramatically driven. It's so story driven, right? Like irresistible or Buckley. But where Bill sort of illuminates a different kind of attitude is that he's somebody where it's a reality of the world, as you say, and yet he is forced to operate there. He can't avoid it. He can't try to eradicate it. It's tied to his livelihood, you know. And so in that way, it feels very real to the actual world. That's what we have to do.
Well, and he also, to me, Bill is, he really sees the Chinese as humans. He sees the humanity in them, which not all of the characters do. Does he also see them as American?
I think Bill does see the Chinese as American. I think he sees them as American as anyone else, except a little bit further down the scale. I think he sees the America for what it is. Like, he thinks he's American, but he thinks he's Irish. The segregation and the sort of ghettoization of the cities as they grew up. You know, it was a fantastic book I found about the creation of San Francisco. And it's talking about these different areas that people moved in and how the communities sprang up and took care of themselves, and how the ships got tied together and they became one part of the city. Now that's now the financial district. That's where the financial district is, where these ships were all tied together as this temporary land. And I think Bill sees that is what America is. You know, it's just you're just a bit lower than we are.
So you mentioned that Bill can identify himself as an American, but he also identifies as Irish, and the other big Irish presence in our world is Leary, of course, right? And so, in your opinion, like, maybe talk about how does Bill think about them as countrymen and as Irishmen? Like, where are their similarities? Where are their differences?
I think that they absolutely think of each other as brothers. I see their relationship as it's almost like trauma bonded, really, actually. Bill can't help but go back to Leary. Yeah. He gets bullied by him. He gets stepped on him. Unfortunately, when we started the show, Leary's really stepping on Bill, you know, and he takes up a place that is mafia-like. You know, he's not, the union leader thing is true. He's trying to do that. He's trying to be better. But at the end of the day, he's running a team of guys, and he's a criminal. He's resorting to criminal enterprises, and he's prepared to. And he takes that proudly, and he does bully Bill. I mean, one of the first things I have in the show is I get brought down to the docks, and then I get taken in front of him and told what I've got to do. And that is the relationship. And then the next minute we can stand at the bar and we can have a drink and we can give each other advice and whatnot. But it's interesting that they are from different places in Ireland. They're not from close, you know. I pitched Bill as he's from somewhere near Lisburn, which is Northern Ireland. It's not quite Belfast. And, you know, Leary's from Southern Ireland. So there are massive differences. And of course, there's a whole sectarianism thing. I was looking at the history of the Irish that emigrated to America. And according to some of the things I read, the sectarian issue, the Protestant Catholic issue that was often quite prevalent, was there on the East Coast. It followed. But from what I've managed to find and read in San Francisco on the West Coast, it seems that it hadn't quite taken. and people saw themselves as a group. They saw themselves as Irish, and they were trying to look after each other. And that's certainly where we are in the show. Bill believes he can outwit Leary. He believes he can control him like everybody else. I think in the back of his mind, he always knows that I might have to take a beating, and so that's not an equal relationship.
I think it's great, too, because through the relationship with Leary, I mean, you're looking at, when you talk about Bill interacting with so many different characters in the show, that also implies that Bill is incredibly gray because he's dealing with politicians, he's dealing with colleagues, he's dealing with criminals, and he has to work in that area where he can interface with all of those people. And so you have these sort of somewhat these bonds that are somewhat at cross purposes, where Leary is a gangster and yet he's also a countryman, he's also an Irishman, that they're on one side, the Chinese are on another side, and yet he'll interface with Chow, he'll interface with Assam. And there are these connections that he ends up making for business, for expediency, to solve a particular problem, whatever those things may be. And I think that, to me, like, Bill is one of those people that really demonstrates how America's actually made, like how America actually came up, particularly in the cities. Just people rubbing up against each other, and we don't have to like each other. We just have to figure out how to make it work. And that's really interesting to me in observing his character.
It's dangerous to be absolute.
For sure, yeah.
You mentioned the word equilibrium. Does Officer Bill believe that equilibrium is synonymous with the ability to keep peace, for both sides to be able to coexist peacefully? Because Leary certainly doesn't. For Leary, it's us or them. But does Officer Bill believe that these two sides can coexist?
Yes, I think he absolutely believes that two sides can coexist. He just believes there has to be a line. Whether or not he aspires it to say, the line shouldn't be there, things should be better than this, we could all coexist. I think he's just quite clearly saying, you, like he says to people, you stay on that side, I'll stay on this side, and we'll be okay. And he's willing to work around the back of things in order for that to happen. For instance, in season 1, this is a small, maybe a small thing. It's a big thing for the characters, it's a big thing for the show, but it's not something anybody probably noticed. But when Assam is let out after his acquittal from his trial, I sit on the bench with him and I tell him there's a back way out of the
courthouse. Yeah.
So when he goes out the back way, Chow is waiting for him, which means Chow must have known that there was going to be a back way or possibility or messages. And I love that you don't know that. You don't see that. Probably people won't, they'll have missed it every time, even if people have rewatched it. They'll thought, hang on, it's because I've told him.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about, and that makes Chow, objectively the best character in the show, is that there's this sort of magic
the least
quality.
Handsome, though, obviously.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, there's not even a word for what I look like. But there's this idea that Jonathan, I remember talking about Chow, saying he's sort of like such a useful character because he operates in all these different ways, and you can solve all of these problems without really having to explain why. If we do our job properly, people won't ask the question of the logic. They'll just assume he figured out a way. But that ripples out, as Kieran was talking about, so in doing that connection that Kieran was just explaining, you start to underpin the world with a sort of infrastructure that remains below the surface, but gives it richness and gives it depth. And it's the stuff that even if the audience doesn't think about, the actors do. And so it starts to create a substructure for us to interact with each other in the future, which is really fun.
It informs everything. I mean, this is it. Yeah. They gave us a scene in the beginning, episode 1, that established these two guys know each other, and they know each other this well. And you think, oh, okay. How do we know each other? And I keep shaking him down, and Lee keeps dragging me back to him. And I have to sort of do this thing where I take all his weapons, and then and I love doing those scenes with Tom and Hoon, because
my name is Hoon.
With the other guy, because
one of those guys.
We do try and look at the value of where the relationships are at any given time.
Yeah.
You know, I protect Chow from Lee. I'm also bringing Lee along. And there are times when I'm performing a role as a police officer in front of Lee, in front of Chow, trying to protect Chow, not managing to, upsetting him, and then later on trying to apologize to him whilst also taking something away from him. There's loads of real fun things there that, like, yeah, I mean, maybe people don't know, but we're playing and having fun with and saying, how does this ripple go out? And so, yeah, I think the reason I bring that up is because I do think Bill thinks that it's possible to coexist. I think it that is what the city is. This isn't the only relationship. This is just the one that the show is currently focusing on. And this is the edge of the city that you're seeing. There are other edges of the city and there are other lines. And I think Bill thinks all of them have to be very carefully managed.
Well, Kieran, from an audience perspective, I just want to thank you for bringing such thoughtfulness to the role of Big Bill. He is such a complex character who, contrary to Hoon, I believe is fundamentally a really good guy.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you think he's a good guy. I did a drama years ago with this brilliant writer called Jimmy McGovern, and he and I were discussing like elements of drama in a script, and he's such a great writer. And he said, if you show a character having to make a decision, if you show the audience the decision the character has to make, and there's at least two roads, and you know there's a bad one, and you know there's a better one, and you understand the reason why they might go down both of them, and you let the audience see the person make the decision to take the bad road. If you invite the audience into those decisions, they'll go with you. And when you go down that bad road, they'll probably still root for you because they've seen the decision making and they can see themselves in the decision making of like, no, that's the wrong one, but I do get it because there's money down that road, and I get that. and Bill continually makes bad decisions, and it's frustrating seeing somebody make a bad decision. But I think within the decision making, you can see whether somebody intends good or not.
Yeah, his true character and where he is foundationally.
Hopefully, yeah. They also write me witty lines as well. The writers do often write me quite nice little gags, which often helps too. So,
well, before we go, Kieran, we're asking all of our guests on the podcast if they have a relationship to perhaps Bruce Lee's most famous saying, which is "Be like water." In what ways are you like water?
Me personally, in what ways am I personally like
Kieran.
water? I suppose I'm more. Yes, in what ways am I like water? I'm probably more like congealed porridge. I don't think I'm like water at all. I think that that's something to aspire to be, and it's just for me that just means be present and be aware and be ready. And I used to employ that when I used to fence. You know, that you can't fight, you can't use your periphery effectively and sense unless you are present. If you're angry, if you're tense, if you're holding your breath, if you're dreaming of lifting a trophy, if you're thinking about the end, then you're taking away from your short-term memory and your ability to react and respond. And I think that's what I was talking about before with acting. I like to do a lot of thinking and work and detail and add things. But ultimately, when they say action and you're breathing and you're present in the character, hopefully you are fluid, you are able to respond. You know, you're able to act with somebody in a scene and they can be free to do something spontaneous, unexpected, inspired, you know, something nobody expects. And hopefully you can respond in turn and go with them and give them something back. And I think if you're rigid, like congealed porridge, you can't do that.
And I want to say, I think Kieran walks that walk because one of my first memories of working with him is I had an idea for something I wanted to try in the scene. And I was trying to be courteous. And so I said to him, hey, I have a thought about how I want to approach this couple of lines. And then he said, do whatever you want. It was just such a generous way to respond to it, and a playful way to respond to it. And he didn't have to do that. We certainly didn't know each other particularly well at that point. And maybe now he'd tell me that, yes, whoa, just maybe think about that, Hoon. It's probably not a great idea. But I loved that, and it was something that I really took to heart. And then I ruined his day.
Well, Kieran Bew, thank you so much for taking the time. And we all just love you in this role of Big Bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Lovely to be here.
All right, and that is it for us. Until next time, we'd like to thank Kieran Bew for joining us today.
Join us next time where we discuss Episode 8 and speak to the magnificent Diane Doan, who plays my Ling.
Is that the episode that you wrote, Hoon?
It is the episode that I wrote, unless people don't like it, in which case it's not.
Well, we cannot wait. We'll be back with a new podcast after every new episode of Warrior, so come back for more as soon as you've watched Episode 8.
I pray it'll be a good one.
See you soon.
Stream new episodes of Warrior Thursdays only on Max, and listen to the podcast on Max and wherever you listen to podcasts. The Official Warrior Podcast is a Max podcast produced by the Mashup Americans. It is executive produced by Amy S. Choi and Rebecca Lehrer. Our producers are Sarah Pellegrini and Thomas Liu. Our development producer is Nicole Kelly. Our production manager is Shelby Sandlin. The show is mixed by Pedro Rafael Rosado.